a potential employee in the future who's very high stakes is going to find out about this, then the way you tell that story, the story is still authentic. It's you, but the way you narrate it is very, very different.
Client is also an ocean by themselves.
And each one has a different priority. Each one has an X amount of time they've mentally allocated to you.
If you put it this way, it feels like anybody and everybody is somehow a stakeholder.
Naturally, by virtue of being the captain of the ship, you have an abstract sense.
So the most simple definition that's helpful is to say a stakeholder is someone who impacts your work or is impacted by your work.
All of us are different in that we manage these two things very differently.
That goal is critical.
There would be someone who's got a lot more at stake as far as the success of that whole project is concerned.
So power and influence are typically the two parameters that we look at.
Personally, this feels like a slightly more messy quadrant.
And there could be somebody who is high on influence but low on power.
And realizing we are all managing some stakeholders at some point.
Many times the early career mistake is that your worldview is only you and your manager.
Comes as a bit of a root shock to realize that impressing that team is not the job anymore.
The one that you usually forget are your peers, because you have to create visibility for your team with that group.
So glad you called it a habit. It's not an end goal. It's not a thing we're trying to achieve. Oh, I have perfectly managed.
I mean, we're talking so much about, hey, there's work, there's something that's for your play, and there's something for your build. There have been a lot of cases where you've just not thought about the various stakeholders involved.
I mean, honestly, I would personally be the first person to tend in that direction if I could. But I think it's a discipline, and the idea is to keep doing it rather than get good at it and achieve some utopian idea of perfection.
In the world of work, we use a lot of terminology, we use a lot of jargon. And one that's a little less understood by many of us is the concept of a stakeholder. So very often I walk into a room of, several middle managers, and we talk about who is your stakeholder. And very quickly somebody will put their hand up and say, "Oh, the client." But what about your peers? What about your team? Obviously your manager, your super boss. What about that family at home? Remember them? What about that weekend commitment, the volunteer work that you do, any other side gig that you may have picked up? There are a lot of people who, in some way or the other, hold some power and some influence over the work we do. But very often, it's a very, very narrow view of whom we need to manage on a daily basis. But understanding how to manage various stakeholders in your work life, or just life actually, can make sure that it's not just about that one big project or that new product launch, but a lot of your day to day goes a lot more smoothly. So, this is a topic that I love. It's a topic that I could talk about for hours, and it has that many nuances. But of course, we'll try to make it small talk for you. Welcome to Small Talk Work Play Build. I'm Subha Chandrasekharan, a leadership coach and career growth coach.
And I'm Hasita. I'm a brand consultant and co-founder at Motley Crue.
So you have an agency, which means you have plenty of stakeholders.
And as you were just saying all that, I realized suddenly my room of stakeholders is getting very stuffy because it's so full.
Yeah, it's nice and airy when you think of it as just that one paying client,
Yeah.
whether they're nice or not. But when you kind of limit it to that. But this is where a lot of conversations take place, and just trying to understand who is this animal
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
stakeholder.
Yeah, but somehow, I mean, naturally, by virtue of being the captain of the ship, you have an abstract sense, if not a
Hmm.
very concrete idea at all times. So there are many people involved. And also, I mean, hopefully, some humility about that fact that they've all come to work with you. So there
Yeah,
is that
yeah,
synergy somewhere.
yeah.
And somehow, to me, it always so I've been on both ends of this conversation, right? So, and every branding exercise begins with stakeholder mapping in
Hmm.
most cases,
Hmm.
because, like you said, people are very surprised to find out that there are at least six people in the context of
Hmm.
work, and those are not six people, but like six organizations,
Correct,
six
correct.
entities,
Yeah,
and multiple people, of course, within that entity
yeah.
as well. And it comes as a very interesting inflection point to say, okay, but my story was always customized for the customer.
Mm.
I never, and if you see any brand with a little bit of lack of depth, it's because they've typically only looked at that one narrow,
Yeah. Yeah.
point of view.
Correct.
But the
Correct.
moment you say, okay, a potential investor in the future is going to listen to this, or a potential employee in the future who's very high stakes is going to find out about this, then the way you tell that story, the story is still authentic. It's
Mm.
you, but the way you narrate it is very, very different.
Very different. Yeah. And similarly in large organizations, when you ask somebody who's your stakeholder, you have instant, like, the client comes to mind, right?
Hmm.
But the client is also an ocean by themselves, right? So are you going to be spending the same amount of time, or are you going to get that airtime with the client CEO as you do with the client project manager who is calling you 5 times a day,
Yeah.
uh, versus the client accounts team or the client marketing team? So there are, even when you say client, that kind of putting it all in one bucket
Yeah.
then means you're not doing the management that you need to do.
Because it's the multiverse of client, no, and
Yeah,
each one has a different priority, each one has an x amount of time they've mentally allocated to you based on how the systems are. So if I think of a procurement team or an accounts team, we are probably one of 400 vendors that they have to
correct,
manage on
correct.
any given day, and so they will find a system that works for them. It may not always be the
Yeah,
system that's most convenient for the rest of us.
correct. So it's actually, a lot of another word for this management is you're constantly aligning all these people,
Hmm.
so that you get the outcome that ultimately as a group you need and you definitely individually need to achieve,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So very often when we're asked what is this animal, like, how do I know whether someone is my stakeholder or not?
Hmm.
Simple question, right? Because if you put it this way, it feels like anybody and everybody is somehow a stakeholder.
Yeah, which
And
is
I
overwhelming in
mm,
and of itself
yeah,
and serves
yeah,
no purpose.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
not practical, right? So the most simple definition that's helpful is to say a stakeholder is someone who impacts your work
Hmm.
or is impacted by your work,
Hmm.
one of the two, right? So when you say impacts your work, very quickly, your team, like, if they don't turn up,
Yeah.
right, your work is not getting done. If even if the client is not given you the brief,
Hmm.
right, or told you today or this week, what do I need, what am I expecting,
Yeah.
right, what is my larger organization expecting, then it impacts.
Which is that whole trickle down. So it's
Mm,
like an intricate web almost of
very
so
much.
many different things
Yeah,
happening at the
yeah.
same time. And I mean, one would hope that, it all works out magically at all times. But I think we all know the very real and very everyday frustrations of dealing with simple things,
Mm,
which to us may seem so obvious.
yeah,
And oh, why can't? But I think the fallacy there is that we are thinking it's about us, whereas it's probably not. It's about this universe of
correct,
organisms
correct.
interacting with
Yeah,
each other.
yeah. So many times mid managers ask, they say, okay, fine, like, there's this universe.
Hmm.
Now that I'm digging deeper or thinking harder about this, yes, there is an inner circle that is got a stronger influence, and then there's the next circle, and then there's the next circle. But so what?
Yeah.
Like you said, it won't it at some point sort itself out, and
Hmm.
everybody will do what they're supposed to do in a way, or not do, whatever may be
Hmm.
the case. But you as an individual, right, you are in charge of a project, you're in charge of an outcome, you're a founder, you're running a business, you have limited energy,
Hmm.
and you want to optimize the use of that energy because stakeholder management sucks it out of you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, on the one hand, we are acknowledging that there are so many
Yeah.
people. How is this simplifying my life? If
Ah,
I'm going to
correct.
be very honest about it, like just the acknowledgement of the existence of these many people, I feel like viscerally, I get what you mean. But also, how do I not complicate my life
Yeah,
trying to chase these people's priorities?
yeah,
Because the priority and the stakeholder are different things.
correct, correct. I was, when you were saying that, I was suddenly, I don't know why this image flashed in front of my eyes of that joint family system that we had. Those were
Yeah.
probably like, training grounds for stakeholder management, right? You can't give the same energy to everybody in the house.
Yeah.
But there are certain people who definitely have more power, some who have more influence, and power and influence are two very different things
On various subjects.
on various subjects, that too, right?
Hmm.
Like the kitchen has different power and influence. The the
Living
business
room
that
is
the
different.
family
Yeah.
runs has a different power and influence. But I think that's a kind of organism we're looking at. You're in that house,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Fair.
all these people coexist for
Fair.
that outcome, right?
Hmm.
For that project that you're working on, or for that business that you're building, you are in that house.
Hmm. So then, is it fair to say that the way to manage this multidimensional being is really to start communicating priorities and start communicating locus of control?
Hmm.
Because it's not about saying, okay, here are 20 people and now they're all my problem.
Yeah.
That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to enable each individual or each creature to the extent that it needs to support a
Correct.
shared goal.
Correct. And don't we feel it even in our day to day, like we've talked about it? If I want to step out for a 2 day work trip,
Mm.
you have to tell this person and that person and that person, and you have to organize the
Yeah,
support system. So imagine if you're in this joint family house and you're going to step away for 2 days, are you going to go around telling every single person in the house? You don't have that kind of energy.
true.
So even this communication has to be done smartly,
Hmm.
has to be done in a way where you may tell 29 people, and if you haven't told the 30th, but they're the ones who you
Hmm,
needed
hmm,
to tell, but
hmm.
you just didn't get down to it.
And actually, I see now what you meant by power and influence are different things. Suddenly, there's, I think, a little more awareness on saying,
Hmm.
okay, how do you communicate with one group versus the other? But in the context of work, especially, is there a way to do it which is more, I don't know, real, tangible? Like you can look at it and say, okay, I know that this category of whatever people or
Hmm.
this organism falls in this
Hmm.
bracket,
Yeah.
and therefore this is my process for
Yeah.
that bracket.
First is to say, hey, I need to have a process. I can't, this is
Oh,
not my
yeah. I mean,
24 by 7 thing to do.
okay, just to clarify, like when you're a small agency, and by small I mean in terms of numbers, and you're
Hmm.
doing a lot of work, the first thing you do is process. You have to throw a process at it, otherwise it's going to break very quickly.
You throw the word and see how many people it lands on. If it doesn't land on somebody, they can kindly find the
Exit.
exit door.
Yes. Yeah.
Because without process, this is not going
It's
to
just not going to
survive.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think the first thing is to sit down and when you ask a founder, when you ask leaders, hey, sit down, just grab a piece of paper. This is as simple as an exercise,
Mm-hmm.
right? And list down everybody who impacts your work or is impacted by your work, and
Mm-hmm.
you have to initially nudge a lot,
Mm-hmm.
because you have a, let's say, a project manager or a leader who's been tasked with this new project, right? And you have to, let's say, create something. Let's take something simple also. Let's say you have to create a new website
Mm-hmm.
for your business line, right? uh, the number of stakeholders there are much larger than they typically imagine, right?
Always.
Because even something, okay, you'll they'll write down team, they'll write down, and even team they'll write in a very kind of a one lump, right? But
Mm-hmm.
in your team you have different skill sets or different groups or
Yeah.
subgroups. Now if you're putting together a website, there is the infrastructure, so there's IT, there is somebody who's going to sponsor this, there's probably an external agency, right? If you're in a slightly, let's say if you're, this is an outsourced framework, then you're building this for someone else, so there's that whole
Mm-hmm.
client animal,
Yeah.
otherwise there's the customer animal,
Correct. Yeah.
but there is somebody external
Yeah.
that
Is going to be impacted by
that is
this in
going to
very
be
real ways.
impacted,
Yeah.
right? Now you sit down to do this, and your technology is something that half your team doesn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Then suddenly the training team comes in as a
Mm-hmm.
stakeholder, right?
Mm.
Because you need them up the curve very soon,
Yeah.
or you have a resource issue, or you have a resource issue, and so HR has to onboard people very quickly with a certain skill set, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now that's a stakeholder you have to align with, you have to manage with, because they are part of another universe where they're doing 100
Happy and
other,
doing other, I mean, whatever, doing other
yeah,
things.
doing other things, right? So first is to put down on paper, hey, what does this universe look like?
Hmm.
Then can I give it some shape and form to say who's that kind of inner circle,
Hmm.
right? Who is the next
That's
round,
interesting.
right?
Hmm.
So who is it that very deeply impacts my day to day work, maybe,
Hmm.
right? Who is that next layer which I need to keep popping in and out of,
Hmm.
because I will keep needing things from them at different points in time,
Hmm.
right? And then there is that kind of an outer layer which is many times much beyond my day to day scope,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So, like if you're a listed company, there's the investor, there's the public shareholders, there's a regulator, right? If you're doing something in a new space, there are so many people just watching,
Hmm.
right? Like let's say the EV space that, as it grew,
Yeah.
or even a lot of these AI tools that people are building. There's a lot of people, a lot of us watching
Hmm.
to say
Hmm.
what's going to happen here. But am I going to spend day to day time and energy thinking about them? No. So they're in that much larger outer circle,
Interesting.
but they
Yeah.
exist,
Hmm.
right? Because
And how much of this classification do you think is unique to the system, and how much of it is about the people running it? Because I'm just thinking, when you are in senior leadership,
mm,
you have a set of agreed KRs which you've either agreed to voluntarily or inherited
mm,
from someone.
mm,
And you have a set of tools, skills, availability of resources
mm,
which you're also managing. Now, all of us are different in that we manage these two things very differently, right?
mm.
So does it come down to some kind of value system in terms of saying, okay, these are the three things that are important to me or my entity this year, and therefore I'm doing this? Or is it, here's a system, apply it standard, make it work across the board?
Yeah, I guess somewhere in between, in the sense that that goal is critical,
Mm-hmm.
right? The articulation of, for yourself, firstly, that this is what I want to achieve with this group or
Hmm.
in this time frame, right? The next 3 months are going to be about getting this website up and running,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
that's my largest priority,
Hmm.
right? And hence I'm going to do a little bit of analysis around who are the people, try and figure out who all the stakeholders are,
Yeah.
and then say, hey, I have only 3 months and hence so many days and so many hours and hence so much energy,
Yeah.
right? More than time, it's an energy thing, because I need, like you said, I need to communicate, which takes a lot of effort,
Yeah.
right? So, whom do I want to communicate to, and how much do I want to communicate with them,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So, the process comes in there, or the framework comes in there, and like most behavioral skills, it's a 2 by 2, it's a matrix.
Okay.
Right? So
As
there's a,
always.
yeah, the
So.
easiest, I think, somehow somebody discovered. So there's a power axis and an influence axis,
Mm-hmm.
right? So somebody could be high power or low power, meaning that do they have the ability to just yank this plug completely,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So typically a sponsor or the paying client, in that paying client there's a CFO or a procurement head,
Right.
right? They have power because
Mm-hmm.
they can literally turn that switch on or off,
Okay.
right? Then there is the axis of influence. How much can they influence what happens in
Mm.
this, right?
Which, yeah, I mean, honestly, that CFO is probably on the lower influence side, which
Huh,
is interesting because there would be someone who's got a lot more at stake as far as the success of that whole project is concerned.
correct. Right? So somebody who's saying, hey, it has to be this technology.
Mm-hmm.
If we're putting out something new, then my influence comes in saying that this has to be the technology that our partner uses,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Correct.
Otherwise we're not being current, or otherwise we're not doing the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So power and influence are typically the two parameters that we look at, and the messiest but most important and quadrant is obviously high power and high influence,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
somebody who yields both is where you have to logically, emotionally put in your most energy, because
Mm-hmm.
they genuinely need to be managed, because otherwise both those things go wrong,
Right.
right? So your conversations are most with them. Am I aligned? Am I doing what you need? Right? Are you aware and hence supporting me in the way that I need it? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, am I giving you all the updates? Am I giving you the information that you need? Am I taking your feedback,
Mm.
considering it with the importance
That
that
it
it
deserves.
brings?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Fair.
So that is one. Then there could be somebody who is high on power but lower on influence. Like you said, like a procurement or CFO is high on power in the sense that they can only say that X rupees is allotted, but they control that X. But their influence on whether that X goes to A or B is much lower,
Yeah.
right? Because they don't understand the technology, they don't want to, that's not their role,
Fair
right?
enough.
So their influence in how you do it is low, right? But their power is high.
And therefore, I think for them also the way to understand this, and I don't know, for me personally, this feels like a slightly more messy quadrant
Hmm.
because on
Hmm.
what basis would they make those decisions is
Hmm.
something that none of us have visibility into.
Correct, right? So how do you make sure that you're giving them the information that they need, that is useful to them, in a language that they will understand?
I think that last thing is probably so important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Then there could be somebody who is high on influence but low on power, right? So there is a client account manager or a client project manager who is uh, voice people listen to, in the sense that they have an influence, right?
Yeah.
But they don't have the power to make this decision.
A lot of consultants as well,
Huh.
honestly, who plug into the system and
Yeah,
bring that expertise are in a similar,
yeah,
yeah.
right. So how do I manage them is the third aspect. And the fourth is low power, low interest, because you think or you know that right now they're not in your scheme of things. In many projects, especially the kind of work that we do, we are one of the partners,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So there's another partner agency in your case, where for you right now they have no kind of power or influence over your work, but you need to keep an eye on them, you need to engage with them,
Yeah,
right? You need to have some kind of alignment that hey, both of us are serving this goal in different ways right now and through different forums and mediums, but that could change, right? That one day that somebody has decided, then the power they yield or the influence they yield may change.
correct.
Suddenly
Yeah.
the founder of that agency steps in because they know this
Client very
sponsor
well,
really
or
well
maybe, yeah, yeah.
personally, then the whole equation changes,
Yeah.
right?
But and as I'm listening to you on this more, I'm realizing we are all managing some stakeholders at some
Oh yeah.
point. It's not unique to be a manager, and therefore, of
No,
course, I
no.
mean, your locus of control might be a little higher, but
Hmm.
even as an employee, you are still
Yeah,
managing
yeah.
various stakeholders. Whether, and it's interesting because I think a lot of times that conversation typically translates into the manager feeling like, oh, I'm not hearing from this person enough. And the reason perhaps that the person's not speaking up as much is because they don't one think of this manager as a
Hmm.
stakeholder, right? Like it's
Hmm.
never been articulated in those many,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
impress your managers, not the mandate is what. But
yeah,
you're not even impressing, you're just communicating. You're
yeah.
trying
Or
to.
you're over impressing. Like,
Mm.
many times the early career mistake is that your worldview is only you and your manager,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that's the person who can teach you, can give you feedback, will appraise you.
yeah.
Everything is that one pipe,
Linear.
right? But
Hmm.
you forget that there are peers you need to build relationships
Relationships with
with,
and work
learn
with.
from,
Yeah,
work with,
yeah,
and see how they can expose you to newer ideas or skills or
yeah.
contribute to what you are doing.
Because soon enough, one of those peers, and maybe you, will become the manager
Yeah,
for the
that.
same group of people
Yeah,
that you have,
yeah, yeah.
been a
I
peer
mean,
to.
in life, that's the thing. No, you never know who's going to be your boss tomorrow,
Yeah,
right? For
yeah.
whatever reason. So
Mm,
yeah, that is true. The next, that first time manager,
mm,
kind of very excited to lead a team where everything becomes about their team.
mm, mm,
That's the only view of the world that they have right now. That hey, I have to get it right with this set of people,
mm, mm, mm,
right? If I can crack this,
mm.
then everything else will fall into
Yeah,
place
yeah,
because I am the sum total of their output,
yeah. And
right?
it comes as a bit of a rude shock to realize that impressing that team is not the job anymore.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's where a lot of relationships start getting a little difficult.
true. So while the team is a key stakeholder, don't forget your manager, don't forget your manager's manager,
Mm,
right? And the one that you usually forget are your peer
mm, mm, mm,
group, because you have to create visibility for your team with that group.
mm.
Right? Typically, when you're talking about, okay, there's good talent or high potential talent, or you need somebody new to come into your team, etc. It's this peer group of other managers that you're going to engage with, align with.
Hmm.
And so you're trying to say, hey, I have a really good guy who knows AI,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
he's looking for a project in your team, right? But
Right.
unless you've created that visibility through the year of the good work that your team is
Yeah.
doing,
All that energy that you were pouring into the team will mean nothing if the team is not able to
yeah,
benefit from that in
yeah,
some way.
correct.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that's also your job, no, to have their
Mm-hmm.
back and to grow
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
right? The next layer, that the core middle management, right? There it becomes a lot about the external client.
Mm.
It becomes a lot about, okay, your manager, your team. By now you have an understanding that the cross functional groups, etc., have to be taken care of. What you typically forget is the various dotted lines going upwards, because you do now impact and have influence in other business lines or project lines, etc., because
Mm.
you've built expertise.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're the person that everybody comes to for something, then you have expertise that can benefit multiple project groups,
Right. Right.
right? So then decisions about your career, the conversations are happening with that layer of dotted line folks,
Mm-hmm. And
right?
if you don't know,
And
then
if they
yeah.
don't know you exist, and if you are not managing them, then
Yeah.
you might lose out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So stakeholder management in that sense is not just about that one project, it's your career also that you're managing through this,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's opportunities that you're managing, it's your learning, your growth,
Mm.
everything that you're managing.
And funnily enough, I think very organically we all prioritize different things.
Yeah,
Now
yeah.
as you say it, already the way you prioritize is becoming very clear, in
Hmm.
at least to me. But if I had to sit down and say, okay, let's face this exercise, and of course we have our quadrant, and also is the quadrant something that you'd apply to a project, or is that something again which you would do on a more overarching
No, you
scheme of
can
things?
definitely do it as a project level. So this is
Mm-hmm.
now what is consuming my time and energy. Let me
Mm-hmm.
figure out if I'm using it wisely
Hmm.
or in the right
Sure.
manner,
So fair
right?
enough. So the quadrant is in its lane in that sense. But if you had to look at that overarching big picture
That also is
of
there.
saying,
That and
oh,
that
that's
might look,
also,
yeah, that might
hmm,
also look. So this is an exercise which we say you should, in a way, like do every 6 months
hmm, hmm, hmm.
and see what has changed.
So what you're saying is clarify priorities first and foremost, right? Like, is that where you would
Priorities
want to
comes
begin?
after you clarify who are the people.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
See, your priority is not in isolation,
True. Fair
right?
enough. Yeah.
You've been given this project and it's your priority, but unless you understand that, hey, this is for the organization, this is new technology,
Hmm.
and hence my learning team has to be on board. They
Fair.
have to quickly
Hmm.
find a vendor partner who can skill my team.
Hmm. Hmm.
My HR has to be on board because I need to hire people with these skill sets,
Hmm.
and they need to know, figure out where to go for that,
Hmm.
right? So they all are stakeholders
True. Fair enough. Yeah.
for
Yeah.
that project, right? And I think that the topmost layer, whether it's your startup founder or whether it's a CXO, that's where um, sometimes the energy is very internal.
Hmm.
Like you're always trying to re engineer, revamp,
Hmm.
reconstruct what's happening here for better outcomes, or it's very external,
Hmm. You're
right?
constantly managing image and
Yeah,
impressions
image,
and yeah.
regulators, investors.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? For a startup, you get one really big investor that's enough to really take the
Propel you
pressure
for
in one
yeah,
direction,
yeah.
right? What that investor wants and how
Hmm.
they want you to drive the business, etc., etc. There it becomes about, am I looking enough internally
Hmm.
as well as externally? But yeah, this is I think it's a very interesting kind of continuous
Yeah,
game.
it's a, yeah, yeah, because it's like that Alice in Wonderland example,
I was
that
thinking
place
whack a
where
mole, but okay.
yeah, pretty much of that place where everyone has to keep moving in order to stay at the same place where they were. And
Yeah,
steady state is not as easy
yeah,
as you'd think it
yeah,
should be. Yeah.
correct. And ultimately, steady state is what you want to feel you have so that you
You
can move
can do,
forward,
yeah,
right?
true.
Like,
That's true.
Steady
Yeah.
state is not the goal also, but it can't
It's the
be.
leverage on which you do more.
Yeah, you can't
Yeah.
be in constant crazy motion also, no,
Yeah.
like some
Yeah.
chaos theory diagram.
Yeah. And typically, at what stage of growth for a business do you think something like this should be done, or is it something that everyone needs to do, irrespective of how
I
big, how
think
small
it's
you are?
I mean, honestly, like just as an individual, we should do this
Mm-hmm.
exercise,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the complex lives that we lead today.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're talking so much about, hey, there's work, there's something that's for your play, and there's something for your build,
Hmm.
right? Like if I look at your circles,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's the core agency,
Hmm.
and the people involved, the clients, that whole ecosystem, right? There is this podcast
Yeah.
and its ecosystem. There is diving and its ecosystem, and there's family, friends, all of that,
Hmm.
and its ecosystem. Unless we're kind of constantly
Oof. Suddenly I'm overwhelmed by the number of Venn diagrams in my life. But
and I'd like to say something cheesy like, oh, but when they all intersect, it's magic. But there's nothing like that. I mean,
for 5 minutes. It's magic for 5 minutes. And it's great.
there's
We keep
no,
chasing that high for the rest of our lives.
there's no
Yeah.
utopia like that. It is like a kind of a background work that you're always doing to make sure the right people are aligned.
Yeah.
You've given them the information that they need. Because how did we start off saying this impacts your work or
Mm-hmm.
is impacted by your work? So you want to get it right,
Right. Yeah.
right? And you
True.
want to also use your energy wisely, right? You
Mm-hmm.
don't want to burn out just trying to please one stakeholder,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you achieve that but you found that the rest just burnt itself out.
Yeah. Yeah. Which would be even worse because you don't want to finally set unachievable ambitions.
Yeah,
The idea is not to go so far in one direction
yeah,
that you've really reached some sense of success which nobody knows
yeah,
anymore or
yeah.
understands. Yeah.
And interestingly, there have been you know very visible fails that are good stories to learn from, right?
Mm-hmm.
There have been, let's say, huge product launches. I was reading about the Apple Maps launch, where apparently they just went gung ho with the product, the perfect product that they
Mm-hmm.
thought they had created. Didn't listen much to internal testing, internal feedback, etc., and faced a huge backlash, public backlash, internal, etc. So much so that there were apologies issued.
Mm-hmm.
And today also, maybe I don't know if that's the reason, but we open Google Maps first
Yeah, yeah, always.
for
In
a
fact, you
reason.
try to.
Yeah,
Yeah, and also, honestly, I think that's the source of a lot of PR nightmares is
yeah,
that you forgot someone
correct, correct.
who you ideally should not have forgotten about.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
quite a few advertising fiascos are also for that very reason that you've completely forgot about one cohort
yeah,
at the expense of whatever your
correct, correct,
reputation, your,
correct.
yeah.
Even I think this whole post pandemic hybrid work from home, come to office, there have been a lot of cases where you've just not thought about the various stakeholders involved,
Yeah.
right? And probably number one being the employee themselves, sadly,
Especially in that context.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Your, organizations are issuing memos left and right saying, just now land up
Mm-hmm.
5 days a week. But hey, I'm actually sitting in the
I don't know,
mountains,
different.
right?
Yeah,
and i
yeah.
and i set up an ecosystem here where there are caretakers for the family, or I am caretaker for somebody else,
Hmm.
right? And that's been working for 4 5 years now, initially out of
Yeah.
necessity, and now this is what works for me. And you have not given me a compelling enough reason to uproot all this.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're thinking about your stakeholder, then you are aligned with their needs also,
Fair. Yeah.
right? See, I'm willing to move, I'm willing to relocate, but give me that compelling why.
The simple thing of asking
Yeah, yeah. So,
ourselves and others
yeah,
for that matter.
having those
Mm-hmm.
conversations, listening intently,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of internal resistance could have been predicted, or if you just
It
listened,
seems so,
no,
yeah, normal that, people would not have wanted that, which is
correct.
surprising. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a very it's kind of like the games people play at work kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? This
Yeah.
whole stakeholder management. it, it's really, if you get into the habit of reviewing, right, who's
And
in
yeah.
my vision, peripheral vision, and
No, honestly,
everything.
I'm so glad you called it a habit. It's not an end goal.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not a
yeah.
thing we are trying to achieve. Oh, I have perfectly managed. I mean, honestly, I would personally be the first person to tend in that direction if
Uh,
I could.
uh,
But I think it's a discipline, and the idea is to keep doing it rather
yeah,
than get good at it and achieve some
correct,
utopian idea of
correct.
perfection.
Because one new entrant into that ecosystem can change the game completely,
Yeah.
right? Like one new, very, very fussy recruitment manager, or
Mm.
one very, very fussy client approver,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like completely tilts things in one direction or the other, and like now your whole energy balance has to shift
Yeah. Yeah.
to
True.
align to that.
Yeah.
And if you don't catch it, then you're like, like nothing has happened in the last 6 months, and I'm just frustrated every day. Why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
hopefully the stakeholders in the room are breathing a little more now. They're not feeling squished against each other. So let's hope.
it's time for that big joint family thali. So let's go
Oh,
eat.
damn.
Now, on to our segment that we like to call Read, Watch, Listen. Typically, it's something that's on top of our mind because we just read, watched, or listened to it. And so this week, what's on top of my mind is a Tamil crime thriller called Swirl, The Vertex. This is on Amazon Prime. And started watching it as okay, one more crime thriller. But it really, really grips you. A very small town, there's a huge temple festival going on, and that's the backdrop. And of course, there's a crime, but the twists and turns and the nuances of the characters, and how beautifully the story is told, and how beautifully the imagery from that festival to the crime, and the kind of the back and forth between it. Season 1 just had us gripped, and before we knew it, we were into the vortex of season 2. And I've got like the one last episode left, which is going to kind of bring it all together. Fascinating storytelling. I mean, obviously, there are subtitles, so anyone can watch it, and it's a highly recommend.
So to be on social media is to find out things against your will and wish also sometimes. And the most recent thing I found out is that the paneer that we eat is apparently the cottage cheese is not real. Except I have no idea what is real and what isn't. At least as far, I mean, one would think that at least about your food you wouldn't have to ask that question. But curiously, these days I like to ask people, "Do you cook?" Adults, children, no biases there, right? And the answers are always very interesting. Yeah, I like to cook for my family. Yeah, I make a few recipes from my mom's repertoire. Oh, I only cook when there are 100 people coming home. And it's very interesting to me that the simple, profound act of sharing something, that it's almost an energy exchange. Why do we all do it? And I do happen to have come across this book called Why Cook by Archana Pedtala. She has written another cookbook in the past called Five Morsels of Love. And the reason it's important to me is because she comes from the context of Andhra Pradesh and the food of Andhra, which is where I am from as well. And Why Cook is a book where she chronicles the journeys of multiple women and why they enjoy the process of either growing their own food, harvesting it, bringing new ingredients from the mountains, and just exchanging the joy of feeding another person. So go pick up a copy of Why Cook, and I think it may put some inspiration back into us, if not to find out whether the paneer is real, but at least to feed ourselves.
Interestingly, we both unknowingly went back to our roots to recommend something
True.
this week.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching till the end. See you soon. In the meanwhile, be busy liking, recommending, sharing, and leaving your comments.